a new political force, potentially competing with reform, but a disaster for the Labour Party a year in to their massive election win.
I wouldn't say a disaster for the Labour Party, because I think, part of the Labour Party's weakness is sometimes having people within our ranks and who actually are not helping us to win elections. And Jeremy Corbyn as leader certainly didn't help us to win elections. But it's not surprising, because what we have seen very much since the last general election, more of a fragmentation in British politics, smaller parties, obviously Reform, who recently in a poll were ahead of Labour and the Conservatives, but also other parties, the Greens and others, getting more of a share of the vote. And so I can understand, even though I don't necessarily agree with their politics, why Zarah Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, who are no longer within the Labour Party, should think we can form on the left, if you like, a version of Reform.
So, Zarah Sultana announced on X, didn't she, that she was resigning, leaving the Labour Party, and in the same breath, she's going to form this. Now, I don't know this for fact, but we're hearing that Jeremy Corbyn was surprised that she'd done that, although there has been a lot of talk that he might form
They are meant to be
party.
co-leaders. I think she said they're
co-leaders.
Which is a bit weird that you wouldn't have your other co-leader with you. So maybe they're always... It's a bit like Life of Brian, splitters again, sort of thing,
Well, and also it does make you wonder about, the launch of it if there's a slightly muddled announcement. However, you were saying, weren't you, that there has been a situation in New York where, in the same way that we've seen Reform here, extremely left-wing.
Zora Mamdani, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting thing. Here we have, you can say that it's not very popular, but people that were running on these, what you might call hard left policies, did very well. In the elections, and that's the position that's held on Parliament. No, in this country.
In this country,
but also in New York.
Elections.
Right. No, but also in New York, we now have somebody who is about to win the mayoralty, who is a self-declared hard left socialist. And the point is that he seems to have clear and unequivocal policies. It's not about management consultancy. And that's why a lot of people say that they're prepared to vote for Reform, because there appears to be at least some semblance of clear blue water between the parties. Something to vote for, in other words.
I think we have come on this show so many times and totally acknowledged as representatives or as people who participated in the two main political parties that there is a problem with the way that we do politics in this country. And you're right, it's that management speak, it's not getting to the point, it's the kind of disparate and the huge gap that is forming between those people that we elect and the rest of the population. I don't think that that is something that we would dispute. The problem now is that you get these extreme positions, whether it's kind of like, let's abolish all billionaires, or because it's,
no border controls.
Policy by vibes. Or it's kind of like the easy answers that we'll just, we'll be able to stop the boats and we'll tackle immigration. And you have all these people who are trying to gain these tiny little bits of support by taking quite extreme positions, but without really any sense of how to deliver it. Now, I know we're going to talk about Labour's first year. The problem with what's happened in the last year and, a mistake and U-turn after U-turn is that we have an opportunity now to re-establish the centre ground of politics, and it's been wasted for the last year.
The real question is, what do you two disagree on? People wake up in the morning and think to themselves, well, the Labour Party and the Conservatives are the same thing. That's why they're reaching for Reform. I sit here and go, I don't know the answer to this. Nationalisation, Labour Party no longer supports that. How are you going to bring down the number of people arriving by boats? No idea. And the people who come up with those policies, whether you agree with them or not, are at what you call extremes of the Labour Party. What's the difference?
Rob, the overwhelming reason people are voting Reform, and that includes Labour voters, is around immigration. And it's also about Nigel Farage. If Nigel Farage wasn't around, one wonders how much support they would have. But it is about immigration. Now, we saw a quarter of the Conservatives' vote in 2024 go to Reform. We saw in the local elections this year Reform voters being voted in by... Reform candidates being voted in by Labour voters. And that is why, for the first time, you've got Red Wall Labour MPs saying we have to focus on tackling immigration. fair immigration controls, but ones that actually are controlling what's happening.
Well, we have Yvette Cooper from the Home Secretary, say from the Home Office. She is the Home Office. Home Secretary on later in the programme. And we're going to talk to her about all sorts of things. But one of the information, piece of information that's emerged overnight, is that the Home Office is unaware of how many people might have overstayed their skilled workers. So the government's failed to gather basic information such as whether people leave the UK after the visas expire. Now, this is not just this year.
No, it's been going on for ages.
This is since 2020. So, you know, does anybody actually know how many illegal... immigrants are on the country?
Overstayed.
How many people have overstayed? How many people have visas or not? Because...
Well, you say overstayed in love. Sorry, forgive me. That is being an illegal immigrant.
It's this thing.
Yeah.
It's this type of thing that drives the public potty.
Right.
Yeah.
Because basically, anybody who gets a visa to come here legally,
Yes.
to work, to visit family, as a student,
Well,
on
also,
holiday,
this was specifically set up, wasn't it,
Yeah.
post-Brexit, to look at a skills source. So these are skilled workers.
Yeah, yeah.
So a useful reason for our economy,
it is. Of
you
course
could
it
argue. But now they run out and nobody knows how many there are or
and
not.
as an MP, and I think it's probably the same for many other MPs, I met people who the system finally caught up with, who had come in legally through some of these routes and overstayed. Quite understandably, you know, the politicians, the public are focused on the boats, and we had the biggest number of people coming over by boats
Up
this
40%
year, up
year on year.
40%. But actually, this issue has been a bit in the shadows, and it is where people do come in. We should be able to, particularly on these work visas, which are very organised, first of all, know what date they came in, what date they were released. We talk about living in a digital age. It can't be that hard. But the other thing, Kate, is employers. They are bound by law to make sure that they are employing people with the right status to be here. So I think a combination of we need a better digital system to control this. We need to make sure that employers are doing their job legally in employing people. But importantly, I think the other aspect of this is digital ID cards. I was always in favour of ID cards. I think we could do it digitally now in a way that for all of us who share our identity all the time, but also particularly for people coming in, it could help. But it is quite ridiculous, and I think the public just finds this absolutely frustrating.
Yeah.
And that's why I smile, because it's exasperation at what's going on.
But I also think that when you get into a government department, and this is the thing that really gets dragged down, especially with politicians, is that, you know, this is all about data sharing and being able to have access to data and having IT systems in place. There is a general incompetence, I think, in government, in our bureaucracy, in terms of being able to deliver this. And there is some level of confusion as to the law that governs how you data share, what access government can have to data. Not a law, but lots of different kinds of laws in, well, as I was always told, levels of GDPR compliance and other kind of data legals that were made it difficult.
So you're saying the Home Secretary, if she wants to find out how many people have overstayed illegally, can't find out because of laws governing data protection?
You should absolutely put that to her, but I think there will be an issue as to why that number isn't produced and whether that is because there's data compliance issues around it.
And Yvette Cooper, as Home Secretary in this government, have got a chance to actually seize this and get it right. They've got, you know, at least 3 years to sort this out, but it is an Achilles heel in our immigration policies.
Well, I mean, £15.3 billion is the projected cost of asylum accommodation, much of that in hotels. When we talk about your language driving communities potty, that's over the next 10 years. Again, you look at the Conservatives, you look at Labour, where's the clear, serious policy to stop it? You know, and I wonder what report card, in other words, what grade would you give Labour over the last year? A, B, C, D minus, Salma?
No, I think that, unfortunately, look, nobody wants their government to fail, but this has not been a great first year by any measure. And I think there is, I think I'd give it a big fat F because of where it's gone in terms of the economy, in terms of where it's gone. I mean, remember there were 5 missions. What happened to the 5 missions that we were supposed to drive? OK, great, we've had an NHS announcement. It's going to be digitised, it's going to be personalised. But where the proof is going to be in the pudding at the end of 5 years if I can get an appointment with my GP on the app. And, yeah, sure, 14 years of Conservative government, it did not end well. We were booted out. So where's this magical change that we were expecting? Not occurred yet.
Well, he did, to be fair, on the day after elections say, you can't change a country quickly, you can't just flick a switch. I wonder if, Caroline, the frustration with his first year and the big fat F that Salma's giving this government is about not making change within the year or about apparent massive mishandling of the steps they have done, because I think that's more the perceptive problem possibly now.
Look, I think, it'd be daft to suggest that there have not been issues and problems.
Yeah.
There certainly have. But, when Labour won with, a huge majority, they actually came in as a sort of, if you like, an antidote to the turmoil we'd had in the previous 4 years. 3 prime ministers, 5 chancellors. And actually people were saying, well, Keir Starmer might not be as flash as Boris or what have you, but he looks steady, and that's what we need.
And there was on change, didn't he?
Yeah,
but
there was a reasonable King's speech in which they addressed, for example, planning reform to make sure we built more homes and encourages businesses, but also tackling the water companies. We've had the breakfast clubs and a number of other initiatives. The problem is it got overshadowed by, obviously, the introduction of the winter fuel payment. Then we had, obviously, the freebie gate situation. And then counter that with the fact that he is one of a small number of leaders who've managed to get a reasonably good relationship with Trump. That has helped us at NATO. That has helped us in the tariff discussion. But clearly, the past few weeks with the welfare benefits row has again overshadowed things. They will have to learn from this, but a lot can change. I think in 1981, a couple of years after Margaret Thatcher won the 1979 election, she was minus 41% in the polls. They've got at least 3 years to get this right.
Well, I mean, the polls as they currently stand average 24% in the past month. That's down 10 points from 34% in the weeks following the 2024 election. That's disastrous electorally. I hear what you say about Margaret Thatcher. I wonder whether, in all seriousness, looking at the buffet of talent in Keir Starmer's cabinet, you look at that and you think that that's similar to the political forces who were in Thatcher's cabinet at that time. Do you seriously think that?
Well, I think we can be a bit nostalgia about the past and remember the things they, if you like, did positively and forget some of the things that went wrong. There were things under Tony Blair, who is also cited as one of our great post-World War II leaders, that didn't always work in the way he wanted, whether that was on international issues like Iraq or whether it actually was on issues around immigration as well, when we were one of the first country to remove all barriers to the Eastern European countries come in, when most of the rest of Europe didn't do that. So there is time on this. But the big element that is different here, going back to the top of our discussion, is reform. Because there is no doubt that that is a new marker in British politics in terms of how both the Tory party and the Labour Party fare. And as I said, the recent poll is given, I think, not only the Tory party, who would be in oblivion if reform matched its present situation in a few years' time at a general election, but also worries for Labour as well.
And that, I guess, is what brings us back to a conversation about Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana setting up a new party, because there was no doubt that Jeremy Corbyn brought a lot of young people. Oh,
sorry.
Your mum's calling.
The kids have seen me on TV.
Hiya.
Doing a lot.
It's to confiscate those phones if it happened again.
Yeah, exactly. That they were... I've lost my train of thought now.
Zarah Sultana, new party.
Exactly. that he did when he was leader of the Labour Party, but not successful, as you pointed out, in terms of winning an election, but brought a huge number of young people into the Labour Party. And those people, if the polls are to be believed, are not being represented by Labour now. So is there a risk that on the left there could be a reform?
Well, I don't think you should ever take anything for granted in politics. And the way in which, if you like, the party establishment took things pretty much for granted for a long time. You know, post, obviously, you know, the Liberal Party demise in the early part of the 20th century, it's been pretty much, you know, Labour-Tory. And again, you know, it is clear we have more fragmentation. It used to be that for smaller parties to get a foothold, there was a huge push for proportional representation for them to get the numbers. We've clearly seen that reform is different to what we've seen before. But I think bear in mind, the reform is, in some senses, yes, it is a new party with its name, but it's not really a new party. A version of reform, the UKIP party, the Brexit party, has been going on for decades. And, of course, Nigel Farage is the factor.
Yeah, but Caroline, let's not forget, like, you and I both accept that there is a stasis that is in British politics. Otherwise, it's not just about Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana. It's not just about reform. It's about the Greens. It's about the Lib Dem resurgence, right? This is a big split across the political spectrum. Something is going wrong in the way that we do our politics. Something is going wrong in the way that we run our country. And we're not facing up to that. And actually, there might need, you know, a bit of radicalism. So I get what you're saying. You know, that Labour was supposed to bring stability with calm Starmer, but that's not, I don't think that that's what the public is asking for. Things are really bad out there. And I take my share of the responsibility as well. I think it's cowardly not to do that, having been part of a Tory government. But there is something fundamentally broken, and we're not fixing it.
I think I don't necessarily should not always disagree on it. I don't disagree with that. I think partly for Labour, it's about, you know, what is their vision, what's their message. Actually, in its own sense, the announcements about the NHS, you know, whilst there's a lot to, you know, in the detail about that, it does portray a vision of what the NHS should look like in the future. But on the other side of things as well, is what Labour has to do is be seen to be really in tune with the public's concerns, what they're really, really worried about.
I'm not sure that they have to be seen to be in tune. I think they probably have to be in tune.
No, I agree.
I mean, I think that's the problem, and I know you agree with that, but that is the problem. You looked at that vision of the NHS, and you thought, I'm sure every political party would agree that these were good things. It's about delivering and understanding that people need that delivery quickly. I mean, one of the things we were talking very much yesterday about the PMQs and the Chancellor's, you know, it was just tears, and it was, if not sobbing, but certainly tears. And it was like watching somebody in absolute anguish. It was the most extraordinary scenes. Yesterday, we saw a very different Chancellor. I thought she looked physically very different. She looked refreshed and back. And there were so many comments yesterday, genuine comments about how she was yesterday. Here she is today, looking much better. Obviously, a very well-planned moment. It was a surprise she was there at the launch of the 10-year plan. Hadn't necessarily been flagged up, but in the circumstances, she was there and explaining what had happened, and it was personal issues and wanting to move on. But a lot of people on social media, particularly coming to me, were saying, well, it was personal for us when they took away winter fuel payments. It was personal for us when they were attacking PIP, taking away our ability to be disabled. You know, where were the tears then? It feels like even in that moment where I think most people sympathise with her, there's a disconnect.
Yeah, I get that. And also, I think, you know, we don't know what the personal issue was, but I was a bit surprised that in those circumstances, my experience has always been, and I know she's the Chancellor, I know it's the day after the welfare reform, but if something personally has happened in your life that is causing real distress, then normally what would happen is that actually there'd be a quiet word with sort of the opposition to say, there's something gone on here, this person might not be here today.
But what does that say about politics?
Well,
her absence, she thought, would then lead her to be exposed to something else.
Yes, I agree. But the thing is, the fact that she looked incredibly distressed, she looked like she'd been crying all night. That didn't necessarily help either. But I think if it was a personal issue, then you might have actually taken the approach that has happened in the past, where, you know, in those circumstances, whoever's in opposition, Labour or Tory, has tended not to try and score points out of someone not being there if it's it's for that. But that being said, the truth is the public they do demand a lot, and they're quite right to demand a lot. And when politicians do obviously try to be more human, They understand that, but at the same time, they want politicians to understand where they are, their concerns and what's happening to them. And you can't necessarily always count as a politician on being able to say, I've just had a hard day. Lots of people are having hard days.
Not sure about that, Sultan.
No, I'm not sure about it, and I get it. Personal sympathies, and you're right. If there was a personal issue, they should have discussed it with the opposition. Yeah. But, you know, this is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The absence of information that was there set all the rumour mill and the gossip mill off. That had an impact on the debt markets. If we are going to show... You've just said, Caroline, that Keir Starmer, after our woeful last 5 years in government, you know, couldn't keep a Prime Minister for longer than 2 weeks... You know, you wanted that stability. That did not show stability. That did not show a confident nation. And here's the deal. You go into public life, yes, it's horrible. Yes, you're massively scrutinised, but you have an immense amount of power that you are supposed to use for the benefit of the country. And it cannot be that we have a situation that really hurts brand Britain in that way without it being thought through.
Yeah.
I thought it was shocking.
Is there something specific, and you both are women in politics, about being... Well, she is the first female Chancellor. Did you sense any kind of reaction that was related to that? Is it difficult? Is there something different about being a woman? I didn't particularly sense that in terms of the reaction, actually, this time. I think if a man had been sobbing, it would have been as...
Let's put it this way, right? There's been loads of work in the NHS around women's health and how women's physiology has not been treated in the same way. There are differences, there's hormonal differences, there's all kinds of physical differences. You don't want that to become an excuse as to why you can't be a person in the top job. And so I think there's a reluctance to talk about that. But when, you know, Justin Trudeau was the Canadian Prime Minister and cried at the drop of a hat, I was also a little bit sort of like, why does he keep doing that? So I think that it's unfair to draw a sex comparison about being a female there. We have to acknowledge that there are differences, but it doesn't mean that that's the reason that happened.
We better let the man speak, haven't we?
Yeah.
Rob.
Listen, I mean, I also cry at the drop of a hat, but I'm not in charge of the global economy. But, you know, you talk about people's real-world problems. What Reform is speaking to, as what you were talking about, Caroline, is what it's like to live in communities day to day. And we've got the Home Secretary here to give you some numbers at some point later. We've got 492,000, just close to that, offences in 12 months. That's to give you a sense of it. That's 23% up year on year. That's the price of crime of business retail. So 5.6 million instances of theft, etc. The cost of business is 339 million pounds. That's what businesses are having to spend because there's no police. You know, if your mobile phone is taken, forget about calling the police. Yeah. If you are a victim of mugging, etc. Do you think you can get someone to your house if you're a victim of burglary? That's what people are feeling in the country. And when I'm talking about managerialism, and we were talking about Thatcher's cabinet, or perhaps Michael Foot's, we can have somebody in talking about socialism in due course. The difference is that there appeared to be a series of policies that represented a worldview, a serious, significant, radical change about how we were going to approach these things. Looking at that, crime, the lack of access to a GP, it doesn't appear that there are answers. What it seems to a lot of the public is that there are 10-year plans. And I wonder to which extent that's the problem.
Well, I think the 10-year plan is about a vision of where the NHS needs to be, and there's no doubt about it. If we're going to have an NHS, it has to be more, it has to reform, and that does mean a more community-based, primary care-based service. And you know, West Streeting's very clear. We need to, you know, hospital should be where it's absolutely necessary, but people should be able to get the care on their doorstep in their communities. And one of the things that Labour has said in the plan is they're going to start focusing on these neighbourhood health centres in some of the poorest areas of the country where people are most at risk of poor health. Digital has to be a factor going forward as well to enable us all to use it.
But what about crime? I mean, 83, just people at home, 83,900 mobile phones stolen in 12 months to July 2024. And that's a relationship people feel in their communities, the fear they feel walking outside of their doors. You know, and you ask, well, what's the answer to that? And the answer is, well, we've got a report and a 10-year plan and a commission. But where's the real...
The day-to-day policing.
Policing on the ground?
I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, I will confess that I have also fallen prey to that managerialism within government. And I think you can do that, and you have to find a way, either being held to account by journalists and presenters or being held to account by your constituency. You do need to say what's going to change. Now, here's the thing. There is a separation between a government and the Home Secretary and police forces. So I do think there's police and crime commissioners and police chiefs need to be held accountable as to what's happening immediately in the street, because there is a difference between who's in charge or not.
But the other problem with this is that, you know, and I suppose it's sort of a sign of my age. When I was a Home Office Minister under David Blunkett, Hazel Bliss was a policing minister, we really clamped down on issues around antisocial behaviour. And it's not all children, by the way. Most of it is being done by adults. But we clamped down on it. But what we did was, we did have community policing, but we had police officers working with local authority officers in smaller areas to really have that visible presence. If Yvette Cooper is addressing this now to bring back what we lost under David Cameron, good luck to her and well done.
Well, she's here 8:30 to tell us exactly what she's doing to crack down antisocial behaviour. And you both will be back afterwards to talk about it. So thank you very much for now, though. Thank you very much indeed.